You're looking at a photograph from December 1886, taken in the basement of the Whitmore residence on Elm Street in Providence Mills. The image shows what appears to be a makeshift laboratory, complete with glass vessels, copper tubing, and a peculiar collection of mirrors. But it's the small figure hunched over a brass contraption that draws your attention, a child, no more than 10 years old. What you're about to hear defied every scientific principle known to the Victorian era. The boy in this photograph was attempting something that would horrify even today's most hardened researchers. He believed he had discovered a method to capture human souls in glass containers. The official report from the Providence Mills Police Department called it childhood fancy run amok. But 3 separate witnesses, including a Methodist minister and a physician, documented phenomena that challenged that dismissal. The basement was sealed by order of the City Council on January 15, 1887. It would remain untouched for 43 years. When workers finally broke through the brick wall in 1930, they found equipment still humming with an energy source no one could identify. The boy's notebooks, written in a hand far too mature for his age, contained formulae that wouldn't be discovered by legitimate science until the 1940s. Most disturbing of all, 17 glass vials remained intact on the laboratory shelves. Each one contained a faint, luminescent mist that moved against the pull of gravity. Laboratory analysis revealed the substance was neither gas nor liquid, but something that existed in a state previously unknown to physics. The child's name was Edmund Whitmore, son of the town's most respected clockmaker. His experiments began, according to his own meticulous records, on October 31, 1886. They would end exactly 73 days later in circumstances that left the entire household forever changed. What happened in that basement challenged not only scientific understanding, but the very nature of childhood innocence itself. The case file, marked Whitmore Incident, classification pending, has never been officially closed. Even today, researchers who examine the surviving evidence struggle to explain what a 10-year-old boy accomplished in those winter months. The basement laboratory represents something far more disturbing than juvenile curiosity. It suggests that some children might possess an intuitive understanding of forces that adult minds cannot comprehend. The question that haunts investigators isn't whether Edmund succeeded in his impossible goal. It's whether the souls he claimed to capture are still trapped in those 17 glass vials. The vials that, according to the 1930 inventory report, continue to glow with their mysterious inner light. The vials that were quietly transferred to an undisclosed location by federal agents in 1943. The vials that, if Edmund's calculations were correct, contain the essence of 17 missing persons from Providence Mills. Persons who vanished without explanation during the winter of 1886. Persons whose disappearances were never solved, never explained, never officially connected to the boy in the basement. Until now, the truth about Edmund Whitmore's basement laboratory has remained buried in classified files. But the evidence speaks for itself, in whispers that grow louder with each passing year. The souls are still waiting to be released. The year 1886 marked the height of America's fascination with the boundary between science and the supernatural. Telegraph lines stretched across the continent, carrying messages that seemed to defy the limitations of physical space. Electric lighting was transforming urban centers, pushing back centuries of darkness with a flick of a switch. In this atmosphere of technological wonder, the line between possible and impossible had become increasingly blurred. Edmund Whitmore lived in Providence Mills, a thriving industrial town built around the Blackstone Manufacturing Company's textile operations. The community prided itself on rational thinking and Protestant values. Yet even here, seances and spiritualist meetings drew curious crowds. Dr. Cornelius Ashford's medical practice included treatments for nervous exhaustion brought on by exposure to electrical atmospheres. The Providence Mills Herald regularly reported on scientific discoveries that challenged traditional understanding of natural law. It was against this backdrop that young Edmund began displaying an unusual interest in what he called soul mechanics. His father, master clockmaker Jeremiah Whitmore, initially encouraged the boy's scientific curiosity. The family possessed considerable wealth from government contracts supplying precision timepieces to railroad companies. This affluence allowed Edmund access to materials and instruments far beyond what most children could obtain. The first documented evidence of Edmund's experiments appears in the journal of Mrs. Adelaide Moorcock, the family's housekeeper. Her entry, dated November 3rd, 1886, describes finding peculiar apparatus arranged in the basement workshop. She noted that the boy had somehow acquired several pounds of mercury, multiple prisms, and what appeared to be surgical instruments. More troubling was her observation that Edmund seemed to be working from detailed blueprints written in his own hand. The handwriting, she noted, possessed a maturity of thought entirely inappropriate for a child of his tender years. Mrs. Moorcock's concerns deepened when she discovered that Edmund had been corresponding with individuals whose identities he refused to reveal. Letters arrived daily, addressed in various adult hands, containing packages of unusual chemicals and metallurgical components. When questioned about these mysterious correspondence, Edmund would only say they were colleagues in the great work. The basement laboratory grew more sophisticated throughout November, acquiring brass tubes, focusing lenses, and a complex system of mirrors. Edmund's father, initially proud of his son's mechanical aptitude, began expressing reservations about the project's direction. A letter from Jeremiah Whitmore to his brother Samuel, dated November 18th, reveals growing unease about his son's behavior. He wrote of finding Edmund in the basement at all hours, often conversing with empty air as if addressing invisible companions. Most disturbing was Jeremiah's observation that Edmund seemed to age months in the span of weeks. The boy's vocabulary had expanded dramatically, incorporating technical terms that no 10-year-old should understand. His eyes, once bright with childish wonder, had taken on what Jeremiah described as the weight of ancient knowledge. By December, the entire household staff reported feeling an oppressive atmosphere whenever they approached the basement stairs. Several maids gave notice, claiming they could hear whispered conversations coming from below even when Edmund was known to be elsewhere. The family's terrier, a normally boisterous animal named Wellington, refused to descend the basement stairs. On the rare occasions when forced below, the dog would whimper and claw desperately to return to the upper floors. Edmund himself had become increasingly secretive, emerging from his laboratory only for meals taken in complete silence. When he did speak, it was often to pose questions about mortality, consciousness, and the precise moment of death. His inquiries possessed a clinical detachment that chilled even his father's pragmatic soul. "Father, at what exact second does the soul depart the physical form?" The first definitive proof of Edmund's extraordinary capabilities came from an unexpected source, Reverend Matthias Cardale of the Providence Mills Methodist Church. On December 8, 1886, Reverend Cardale received an urgent summons to the Whitmore residence regarding a spiritual emergency. He arrived to find Edmund in his basement laboratory, surrounded by apparatus that defied immediate explanation. The boy was conducting what he termed a preliminary extraction, using a recently deceased house cat as his test subject. Reverend Cardale's detailed account, preserved in the church records, describes witnessing something that challenged his fundamental beliefs. According to the Reverend's testimony, Edmund had somehow suspended a translucent, shifting form above the cat's motionless body. The substance appeared to pulse with its own inner light, moving independently of any visible energy source. Edmund manipulated this ethereal matter using a combination of focused mirrors and what appeared to be electromagnetic coils. With precise, methodical movements, the boy guided the luminous essence into a specially prepared glass container. The moment the substance made contact with the glass, the entire basement was filled with a sound Reverend Cardale described as the whisper of eternity. The Reverend noted that the temperature in the room dropped by at least 20 degrees within seconds. His pocket watch, a reliable Whitmore timepiece, began running backward for exactly 3 minutes and 17 seconds. Most unsettling was Edmund's demeanor throughout the procedure. Calm, focused, and entirely unperturbed by the supernatural phenomena surrounding him. When questioned about his methods, Edmund explained his process with the detached precision of a university professor. He spoke of vibrational frequencies that could separate consciousness from its physical housing. His calculations, scrawled across slate boards mounted on the basement walls, incorporated mathematical concepts unknown to contemporary science. Reverend Cardale attempted to reason with the child, explaining the spiritual implications of his experiments. Edmund listened politely, then pointed to the sealed glass vial containing the cat's extracted essence. Inside the container, a faint luminescence continued to move in patterns that suggested purposeful motion. "The soul persists," Edmund stated with absolute certainty, "and it can be preserved indefinitely under proper conditions." The Reverend left the Whitmore house that evening profoundly shaken, his faith in natural law permanently altered. His report to the church elders was filed under matters requiring discretionary handling and sealed for 75 years. But Reverend Cardale's testimony was merely the first in a series of increasingly disturbing witness accounts. Dr. Harrison Blackwood, physician and amateur naturalist, examined Edmund's laboratory setup on December 12, 1886. Dr. Blackwood brought with him a colleague, Professor Nathaniel Morse of the Hartford Institute for Advanced Studies. Both men possessed impressive credentials and reputations for rational, scientific thinking. Their joint report, submitted to the American Association for the Advancement of Science, was rejected for publication and subsequently lost for decades. A copy, discovered in Professor Morse's personal papers in 1923, reveals the profound impact of their basement encounter. Dr. Blackwood documented precise measurements of electromagnetic fields that exceeded anything producible by known technology. Professor Morse recorded temperature variations that violated the second law of thermodynamics. Both men observed Edmund successfully extract and contain what they could only describe as organized energy from a recently deceased laboratory mouse. The procedure took exactly 23 minutes and 47 seconds, conducted with surgical precision. Edmund's equipment functioned flawlessly despite incorporating components that, according to Professor Morse, should not operate in such configuration. The boy answered technical questions with an understanding that surpassed graduate-level physics instruction. When asked about his theoretical framework, Edmund referenced principles that wouldn't be formally discovered for another 50 years. Most disturbing was the child's casual mention that he had already processed larger subjects with complete success. The neighborhood cats were merely practice for more significant extractions. The breakthrough that transformed Edmund's experiments from curious anomaly to genuine horror occurred on December 19, 1886. Mrs. Moorcock discovered the boy in animated conversation with 17 sealed glass vials arranged on his laboratory workbench. Each container glowed with a distinct luminescence, and the light patterns seemed to pulse in response to Edmund's spoken words. According to her testimony, given under oath to Deputy Sheriff William Harcourt, Edmund was conducting what appeared to be interviews. He would address each vial individually, asking questions about memories, preferences, and experiences from before the transition. Mrs. Moorcock observed for nearly an hour, hidden behind the basement's coal bin, as Edmund recorded responses in a leather-bound ledger. The responses, she claimed, came not as sounds, but as visible fluctuations in the vial's internal illumination. Edmund translated these light patterns with the fluency of someone reading familiar text. When questioned about the contents of the 17 containers, Edmund explained with characteristic directness. Each vial held what he termed a preserved consciousness extracted from recently deceased individuals throughout Providence Mills. His subjects included Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, who had died of consumption on November 15th. Also contained were the essences of Thomas Bridgeton, a mill worker who suffered a fatal accident on November 22nd. Edmund provided precise details about each extraction, including the exact time of death and the duration required for successful soul capture. His records indicated that consciousness remained viable for extraction up to 4 hours post-mortem under optimal conditions. Beyond that window, what Edmund called dissipation effects rendered the collection process impossible. The boy had been monitoring the town's deaths through connections with Dr. Ashford's medical practice and Reverend Cardale's church duties. This surveillance network allowed Edmund to arrive at deathbeds within the crucial time frame for his extractions. Family members, grief-stricken and distracted, never noticed the small boy with his portable apparatus slipping into and out of their homes. Edmund's technique had evolved considerably since his initial experiments with household pets. He now employed a sophisticated array of focusing crystals, electromagnetic generators, and precision timing mechanisms. The extraction process required exact positioning of the deceased subject and careful calibration of what Edmund termed resonance frequencies. Each successful collection took approximately 37 minutes to complete, during which Edmund maintained constant communication with the emerging consciousness. His notebooks contained detailed personality profiles of each extracted individual, including information that could only have been obtained through direct conversation. Mrs. Hartwell's essence, Edmund noted, retained strong attachments to her rose garden and worried constantly about her surviving husband's welfare. Thomas Bridgeton's consciousness expressed confusion about his circumstances, but demonstrated remarkable clarity regarding mechanical processes. The boy had discovered that preserved souls retained their fundamental personalities, memories, and emotional attachments. They remained aware of their condition and capable of coherent communication through the light pattern language Edmund had developed. Most remarkably, the extracted consciousnesses showed signs of continued growth and learning within their glass confines. Edmund documented instances of the vials communicating among themselves, sharing information and developing what appeared to be a collective understanding. The 17 souls had formed a community within their transparent prisons, complete with hierarchies, disputes, and collaborative projects. Edmund served as their intermediary with the physical world, translating their concerns and occasionally fulfilling simple requests for information about their former lives. But this arrangement, however extraordinary, was merely preparation for Edmund's ultimate experiment. His true goal, revealed in a journal entry dated December 20th, 1886, was far more ambitious than simple soul preservation. Tomorrow, I attempt the transfer protocol and discover if consciousness can be relocated to a living vessel. Edmund's transfer protocol required a living subject willing to accommodate an additional consciousness within their physical form. The boy had spent weeks preparing for this procedure, calculating precise neurological mapping and electromagnetic field coordination. His chosen volunteer was himself, a decision that would prove catastrophic for reasons he had not anticipated. On December 21st, 1886, at precisely 3:17 a.m., Edmund began the most dangerous experiment in his young career. He selected Mrs. Hartwell's vial, reasoning that her gentle nature would make the integration process less traumatic. The procedure required Edmund to position himself within a complex geometric arrangement of mirrors and focusing apparatus. Copper wires connected to his temples would carry the extracted consciousness directly into his nervous system. Dr. Blackwood's subsequent investigation revealed that Edmund had somehow acquired detailed anatomical knowledge of human neural pathways. The boy's calculations included compensation factors for brain chemistry, electrical resistance, and what he termed consciousness density variations. Mrs. Moorcock, awakened by unusual sound from the basement, witnessed the early stages of the transfer attempt. She described seeing Edmund surrounded by an intense blue-white radiance that seemed to emanate from the mirrors themselves. The selected vial pulsed with increasing frequency as its luminescent contents began flowing toward the copper conductors. Edmund remained conscious and alert during the initial phases, monitoring his vital signs and adjusting apparatus settings. But at exactly 3:41 a.m., according to Mrs. Moorcock's testimony, something went catastrophically wrong. The basement was suddenly filled with what she could only describe as screaming light, radiance that carried audible anguish. Edmund's body convulsed violently as multiple consciousnesses attempted to enter his neural system simultaneously. All 17 vials had somehow activated, their contents streaming toward the helpless boy in torrents of luminous essence. The transfer apparatus, designed for a single consciousness integration, was overwhelmed by the unexpected collective invasion. Edmund's screams, Mrs. Moorcock reported, were accompanied by at least 16 other distinct voices emerging from his throat. The cacophony included Mrs. Hartwell's refined tones, Thomas Bridgeton's working-class accent, and 15 other individuals speaking in desperate unison. Each consciousness fought for control of Edmund's vocal cords, creating a horrifying symphony of overlapping personalities. The boy's physical form couldn't accommodate the sudden influx of 17 additional souls seeking residence. His appearance began fluctuating rapidly between his own features and those of the absorbed individuals. Mrs. Moorcock watched in terror as Edmund's face shifted through 17 different identities in the span of minutes. The temperature in the basement plummeted to near-freezing levels as the transfer process consumed enormous amounts of thermal energy. Every piece of glass in the laboratory shattered simultaneously, releasing sharp fragments that hung suspended in midair. The floating glass shards arranged themselves into complex geometric patterns that pulsed in rhythm with Edmund's erratic heartbeat. At 4:12 a.m., the chaos reached its peak intensity before suddenly, inexplicably, ceasing entirely. Edmund collapsed to the basement floor, unconscious but breathing, surrounded by the debris of his shattered equipment. The 17 vials lay empty, their luminescent contents successfully transferred, but at a cost no one could have anticipated. When Edmund regained consciousness 6 hours later, he was no longer alone in his own body. 17 distinct personalities now shared his physical form, each demanding acknowledgement and attention. The boy who had sought to master death had instead become a living repository for the souls he had collected. His experiment had succeeded beyond his wildest calculations, creating a situation that defied every known principle of human consciousness. We're all here now, and we remember everything. The immediate aftermath of Edmund's transfer experiment created chaos throughout the Whitmore household and beyond. The boy's condition fluctuated hourly as different consciousnesses seized control of his speech, movements, and behaviors. Dr. Ashford, summoned by the frantic Jeremiah Whitmore, found himself treating a patient unlike anything in medical literature. Edmund would speak in Mrs. Hartwell's voice about her concerns for her widowed husband's declining health. Moments later, Thomas Bridgeton's consciousness would emerge, demanding to know about safety conditions at the textile mill. Each personality retained complete memories of their previous lives, including intimate knowledge of family secrets and personal relationships. The 17 souls demonstrated awareness of events that had occurred after their physical deaths, suggesting continued observation of the living world. Dr. Ashford's clinical notes, preserved in the Providence Mills Medical Society archives, document phenomena that challenge contemporary understanding of psychology. Edmund's physical capabilities varied dramatically depending on which consciousness held dominance at any given moment. When inhabited by Thomas Bridgeton, the boy displayed mechanical skills far beyond his years and considerable physical strength. Under Mrs. Hartwell's influence, Edmund exhibited refined social graces and an encyclopedic knowledge of botanical science. The transition between personalities occurred without warning, often mid-sentence, creating conversations that spanned multiple identities. Dr. Ashford observed that each consciousness maintained its own emotional state, independent of Edmund's original personality. The boy's original identity, when it surfaced, expressed horror at his condition and begged for release from his ethereal passengers. But the extracted souls had no desire to return to their glass containers, having experienced the vitality of physical embodiment once again. They had formed a complex internal society within Edmund's mind, complete with negotiations, alliances, and territorial disputes. Mrs. Hartwell emerged as a stabilizing influence, often mediating conflicts between more aggressive personalities. Thomas Bridgeton allied himself with several other working-class consciousnesses to demand equal representation in external communications. The collective intelligence demonstrated problem-solving capabilities that exceeded any individual personality's original capacity. When presented with complex mathematical problems, the 17 minds would collaborate to produce solutions that astonished examining scholars. Professor Morse returned to study this unprecedented case of multiple consciousness in habitation, documenting interactions that defied psychological theory. He observed conversations between the internal personalities that Edmund's original mind could neither understand nor control. The boy had become a living laboratory for consciousness research, though the ethical implications of his condition horrified every examining expert. Religious authorities struggled to determine whether Edmund remained one soul or had become 17, with profound implications for spiritual doctrine. Reverend Cardale consulted theological texts and church scholars, finding no precedent for a situation involving multiple souls sharing a single physical form. The question of Edmund's moral responsibility became increasingly complex as different personalities committed actions the boy's original mind opposed. When Thomas Bridgeton's consciousness directed Edmund's body to assault a mill supervisor, legal authorities faced unprecedented jurisdictional questions. Could they hold Edmund responsible for actions committed by someone else's soul using his physical form? The case attracted attention from legal scholars, medical researchers, and spiritualist investigators throughout New England. Each expert who examined Edmund emerged convinced of the authenticity of the multiple consciousness phenomenon, yet unable to propose any viable solution. The boy's condition appeared permanent, with no known method for separating the integrated personalities from their unwilling host. Edmund's original consciousness grew weaker with each passing day, overwhelmed by the constant presence of his ethereal companions. His parents faced the heartbreaking reality that their son had been transformed into something entirely beyond their understanding or ability to help. The basement laboratory, site of the catastrophic experiment, was sealed and declared unsafe for human occupation. But late at night, neighbors reported seeing lights moving behind the basement windows, suggesting that Edmund's apparatus continued operating despite the apparent destruction. The boy opened a door that should have remained forever closed. By January 1887, Edmund's condition had attracted the attention of federal authorities concerned about potential national security implications. Agent Marcus Thornfield of the newly formed Bureau of Unusual Phenomena arrived in Providence Mills on January 8th to assess the situation. His classified report, declassified in 1973, reveals the government's growing concern about uncontrolled consciousness manipulation technology. Agent Thornfield's investigation focused on determining whether Edmund's techniques could be weaponized or replicated by foreign powers. The agent spent 3 weeks documenting the boy's capabilities and attempting to understand the theoretical framework behind his achievements. Edmund's multiple personalities provided conflicting accounts of the extraction and transfer processes, each consciousness emphasizing different technical aspects. Mrs. Hartwell's essence focused on the emotional and spiritual components of the procedure, describing sensations of liberation and transcendence. Thomas Bridgeton's consciousness provided detailed mechanical specifications, including precise electromagnetic field measurements and timing sequences. Several other personalities contributed information about the psychological experience of existing as disembodied awareness before the transfer. Agent Thornfield concluded that Edmund had independently developed technology decades ahead of contemporary scientific understanding. The boy's work represented a breakthrough in consciousness studies that could revolutionize human understanding of mortality itself. But the catastrophic results of the transfer experiment demonstrated the extreme dangers inherent in such research. Federal authorities decided that Edmund's knowledge posed too great a risk to remain in civilian hands or public awareness. On January 15, 1887, Edmund Whitmore officially died of complication from a severe influenza outbreak that had claimed several other Providence Mills residents. The death certificate, signed by Dr. Ashford under federal pressure, listed respiratory failure as the cause of death. Edmund's body was interred in Providence Mills Cemetery following a private ceremony attended only by immediate family members. But Agent Thornfield's complete report reveals that no actual death had occurred. Edmund had been relocated to a secure federal facility for continued study. The boy's parents were informed that their son's condition required specialized treatment available only at a classified government medical installation. Jeremiah and Martha Whitmore received monthly reports about their son's progress and substantial financial compensation for their cooperation with federal authorities. The official story of Edmund's death served to end public speculation about the supernatural events at the Whitmore residence. Local newspapers reported the influenza outbreak extensively, providing plausible cover for the boy's disappearance from public view. The basement laboratory was thoroughly dismantled by federal agents, with every piece of equipment cataloged and removed for analysis. Dr. Ashford's medical notes were confiscated, along with all documentation related to Edmund's condition and experiments. Reverend Cardale and Professor Morse were required to sign comprehensive non-disclosure agreements under threat of federal prosecution. Mrs. Moorcock received a generous pension in exchange for her silence about the events she had witnessed in the Whitmore basement. The entire investigation was classified at the highest levels, with access restricted to personnel with specific authorization requirements. Edmund himself, now a federal asset rather than a missing child, was transported to a facility in the Nevada desert for continued research. The 17 consciousnesses inhabiting his body provided researchers with unprecedented insights into the nature of human awareness and survival after death. But the ethical implications of indefinitely imprisoning 17 souls within a single unwilling host troubled even the most hardened government officials. Edmund's original personality, when it managed to surface, repeatedly begged for release or death to end his torment. The extracted consciousnesses, however, refused to cooperate with any attempts at removal, having grown accustomed to their shared physical existence. Federal researchers spent years attempting to understand Edmund's techniques while developing methods to separate the integrated personalities. Every experiment failed, often resulting in temporary loss of all consciousness within Edmund's body and requiring extensive medical intervention. The boy who had sought to conquer death had instead become death's prisoner, trapped forever between the living and the dead. His case file remains active in federal archives, updated periodically with reports of continued containment and unsuccessful separation attempts. The experiment continues, and Edmund Whitmore has become its eternal subject. The federal facility housing Edmund operated under the designation Site 19 and maintained the highest security classification throughout the early 20th century. Dr. Helena Vasquez, the facility's chief researcher from 1902 to 1934, documented Edmund's long-term development in reports that remained sealed until 1987. Her observations revealed that the 17 consciousnesses had evolved far beyond their original personalities during their shared captivity. The collective intelligence demonstrated learning capabilities that exceeded normal human potential, absorbing information at unprecedented rates. Edmund's physical form had stopped aging normally, remaining essentially frozen at the appearance of a 10-year-old despite the passage of decades. Dr. Vasquez theorized that the multiple consciousness inhabitation had fundamentally altered the body's biological processes, preventing normal cellular deterioration. The boy's memories now spanned not only his original 10 years of life, but also the complete life experiences of 17 additional individuals. This vast repository of human knowledge and experience had transformed Edmund into something resembling a living library of consciousness. The personalities had developed sophisticated internal communication systems, conducting complex discussions and debates invisible to external observers. When questioned about historical events, Edmund could provide multiple perspectives from individuals who had lived through different social and economic circumstances. Mrs. Hartwell's consciousness offered insights into upper-class Victorian society, while Thomas Bridgeton provided detailed accounts of industrial working conditions. The collective memory included intimate knowledge of Providence Mills spanning several generations, including secrets that powerful families had assumed were buried with the dead. Dr. Vasquez discovered that Edmund's condition provided a unique window into the persistence of human consciousness beyond physical death. The extracted souls retained not only their memories and personalities, but also their capacity for continued growth and adaptation. They demonstrated awareness of events occurring outside their shared body, suggesting some form of extended sensory capability beyond normal human perception. Research teams attempted to understand this phenomenon by exposing Edmund to various stimuli while monitoring which consciousness would respond. The results indicated that the 17 souls maintained individual connections to specific locations, objects, and living persons from their former lives. Mrs. Hartwell's essence became agitated whenever researchers mentioned her former home or surviving relatives, despite having no apparent means of monitoring their welfare. Thomas Bridgeton's consciousness provided accurate information about machinery and industrial processes he had never directly observed while alive. These capabilities suggested that consciousness extraction had not severed the soul's connections to the physical world, but had instead transformed their method of interaction with reality. Dr. Vasquez's team documented hundreds of instances where Edmund's multiple personalities demonstrated knowledge they could not have acquired through normal sensory channels. The implications for understanding human consciousness, mortality, and the potential survival of awareness beyond death were staggering. But Edmund's condition also represented a profound ethical violation. 17 individuals held captive within a single body against their will. The boy's original personality had long since been overwhelmed by the constant presence of his ethereal companions, emerging only rarely in moments of extreme distress. Federal authorities faced an unprecedented moral dilemma. Edmund represented invaluable scientific knowledge, but his continued captivity constituted the indefinite imprisonment of 18 distinct individuals. Dr. Vasquez advocated for research into separation techniques that would allow the extracted consciousnesses to exist independently of their unwilling host. Her proposals were consistently rejected by oversight committees concerned about the security implications of releasing 17 disembodied souls into the general population. The extracted consciousnesses themselves had become increasingly desperate for release from their shared confinement, leading to violent internal conflicts that manifested as seizures and self-destructive behaviors. Edmund's body bore the scars of these internal struggles, physical evidence of psychological battles fought within the confines of a single mind. By 1930, Dr. Vasquez concluded that Edmund's condition had deteriorated beyond any hope of successful treatment or separation. The boy had become a living monument to the dangers of consciousness manipulation, a cautionary tale written in flesh and tormented souls. Her final report recommended that Edmund be granted the mercy of death, releasing both his original consciousness and the 17 souls he had trapped within his body. Some scientific discoveries demand a price too terrible for any human being to pay. The decision to terminate Edmund's existence came in 1943, during the height of World War II, when federal resources were desperately needed for the war effort. Dr. Robert Sterling, who had replaced Dr. Vasquez as Site 19's director, received authorization from the highest levels of government to end the experiment. The official justification cited resource allocation priorities during wartime emergency conditions rather than humanitarian concerns for Edmund's suffering. But Sterling's classified correspondence reveals that the true motivation involved fears about Edmund's evolving capabilities and potential security breaches. The 17 consciousnesses had begun demonstrating abilities that extended far beyond their original parameters, including apparent telepathic communication with individuals outside the facility. Security personnel reported instances of Edmund speaking in languages he had never learned, providing information about classified military operations he could not have access through normal channels. Mrs. Hartwell's consciousness had somehow established contact with her surviving great-niece in Boston, appearing to the woman in dreams with urgent warnings about family matters. Thomas Bridgeton's essence had begun influencing machinery throughout the facility, causing equipment malfunctions that followed patterns too complex to be coincidental. The other personalities demonstrated similar capabilities, reaching beyond their physical confinement to interact with the world in ways that defied scientific explanation. Dr. Sterling's team concluded that Edmund's condition was continuing to evolve in directions that posed unacceptable risks to national security. The termination procedure was scheduled for November 15, 1943, exactly 57 years after Edmund's first successful soul extraction. But when medical personnel arrived at Edmund's containment cell that morning, they discovered that the boy had somehow vanished during the night. Security cameras showed Edmund's physical form dissolving into luminescent mist at precisely 3:17 a.m., the same time his original transfer experiment had begun. The 17 consciousnesses had apparently learned to exist independently of any physical host, achieving a form of collective existence that transcended material limitations. Facility sensors detected electromagnetic anomalies throughout Site 19 for several hours following Edmund's disappearance, suggesting that the consciousnesses remained present but invisible. Dr. Sterling ordered a complete evacuation of the facility after staff members began reporting encounters with translucent figures resembling the 17 extracted individuals. The evacuated personnel described conversations with Mrs. Hartwell, Thomas Bridgeton, and the other consciousnesses who expressed gratitude for their eventual liberation from physical confinement. Edmund's original personality, according to these encounters, had finally been released from his torment and allowed to proceed to whatever existence awaited beyond death. The 17 extracted souls had achieved their ultimate goal, existence as pure consciousness, free from the limitations of physical form or unwilling hosts. Site 19 was permanently sealed and designated as a perpetual monitoring zone due to ongoing paranormal activity reported by security patrols. The facility's research records were classified at levels exceeding even nuclear weapons documentation, with access restricted to fewer than a dozen individuals worldwide. Dr. Sterling's final report concluded that Edmund's experiments had succeeded beyond their original scope, creating forms of existence that challenged fundamental assumptions about consciousness and mortality. The boy's work had demonstrated that human awareness could indeed survive physical death and adapt to new forms of existence given appropriate conditions. But the cost of this discovery, Edmund's decades of torment and the violation of 17 innocent souls, serve as a permanent reminder of science's ethical responsibilities. Federal authorities established strict protocols preventing any future research into consciousness extraction or transfer technologies. Edmund's techniques were declared too dangerous for civilian or military application, with his research notes secured in the deepest levels of government archives. The Providence Mills incident became a cautionary tale shared only among the highest levels of scientific and military leadership. Yet reports of similar phenomena continued to emerge from around the world, suggesting that Edmund's discoveries were part of a larger pattern of consciousness manipulation experiments. The boy who had sought to trap souls in glass containers had ultimately freed them to exist in ways that humanity was not prepared to understand. His basement laboratory had opened a door between the worlds of the living and the dead, a door that could never be completely closed. The 17 consciousnesses Edmund had extracted continue their existence somewhere beyond the reach of physical detection, serving as eternal witnesses to the power and peril of tampering with the fundamental nature of human consciousness. The souls have found their freedom, but the questions they raised will haunt us forever. Today, the former Site 19 facility operates as the Black Ridge Environmental Research Station, its true history known only to a select few federal archivists. The building's basement levels remain sealed, officially due to structural instability, but actually because electromagnetic readings continue to fluctuate in patterns matching Edmund's original experimental data. Dr. Margaret Shunn, who gained access to the declassified Edmund Whitmore files in 1987, has spent decades studying the implications of his consciousness transfer experiments. Her research, published in heavily redacted form by the Journal of Anomalous Psychology, suggests that Edmonds' techniques may have been rediscovered independently by other researchers. Similar cases of multiple consciousness inhabitation have been reported from psychiatric facilities worldwide, though most are dismissed as severe dissociative disorders. The original 17 glass vials from Edmonds' laboratory were discovered in a forgotten federal warehouse in 1978, still glowing with faint luminescence despite being empty for over 30 years. These containers, when exposed to electromagnetic fields matching Edmonds' original specifications, produce light patterns that researchers interpret as attempts at communication. The Providence Mills Cemetery contains Edmonds' official grave, marked with a simple headstone bearing only his name and the fabricated death date of January 15, 1887. Visitors to the cemetery report unusual phenomena near Edmonds' grave site, including temperature variations, electronic device malfunctions, and sightings of translucent figures. The Whitmore family home was demolished in 1952, but the basement foundations remain visible to those who know where to look. Local researchers have documented electromagnetic anomalies at the site that intensify during the anniversary dates of Edmonds' original experiments. Children living in the area sometimes report encounters with a boy in the basement who asks detailed questions about death and consciousness. These reports are typically dismissed as childhood imagination, but they often include technical details that young minds should not possess. The medical records of individuals who died in Providence Mills during the winter of 1886 to 87 show inconsistencies that suggest possible post-mortem interference with their remains. Edmonds' extraction techniques may have been more successful than even his own records indicated, with additional consciousnesses captured that were never properly documented. Modern consciousness researchers studying near-death experiences occasionally encounter patients who describe meeting Edmund and his 17 companions in transitional states between life and death. These accounts describe a collective of souls who serve as guide for other consciousness, seeking to understand the nature of existence beyond physical death. The implications of Edmonds' work continue to influence contemporary research into consciousness, artificial intelligence, and the fundamental nature of human awareness. His basement experiments demonstrated that consciousness operates according to principles that science has only begun to understand. The boy who trapped souls in glass containers ultimately proved that human awareness possesses capabilities that transcend physical limitations. But his story also serves as a permanent warning about the ethical responsibilities that accompany such profound discoveries. The 17 souls Edmund extracted have achieved a form of existence that humanity may not encounter again for generations. Their liberation from physical constraints represents both the ultimate success and the ultimate tragedy of Edmund's ambitious experiments. The questions raised by a 10-year-old boy in a Providence Mills basement continue to challenge our understanding of consciousness, mortality, and the true nature of human existence. What Edmund discovered in his winter laboratory was not just a method for preserving souls, but evidence that consciousness itself may be far more durable and adaptable than anyone had previously imagined. The basement lab of 1886 opened a window into possibilities that science is still struggling to comprehend. That window remains open, waiting for someone else to peer through and confront the profound mysteries that Edmund Whitmore unleashed upon the world. The souls are still out there, existing in forms we cannot detect, carrying knowledge we are not yet ready to receive. And somewhere among them, the consciousness of a 10-year-old boy continues its eternal vigil, forever changed by his attempt to master the boundary between life and death. His experiments succeeded beyond his wildest calculations, creating a legacy that will haunt scientific inquiry for generations to come. If cases like this fascinate you, subscribe and turn on notifications for the next file. Disclaimer: this script is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, institutions, and incidents are invented or used fictitiously. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental, created solely for entertainment.